Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm much more relaxed on this fine Sunday afternoon, morning, fine Sunday morning.
Yeah, when you have your own Wi-Fi, it'll do it to you.
Just the elimination of all the nonsense, Finally, just get a I don't even know, just flow into it and settle into the week and figure it out, kind of build a routine. And I had
Yeah,
so much stuff to do. Like I have so many things to like build on my computer and I couldn't do it. So I was just like, man, okay.
for sure. Living on your own, I noticed we had it when in Pro Bowl, obviously, but when you're home, it's different. It's like when you have your own spot at home, just freeing. Wake up,
It,
you just do what you need to do.
right.
But yeah, let's hop into what I've been excited to talk about.
Please.
So last week when we finished off, we kind of hinted at some things that kind of came with what we were talking about last week. And fear is what came to mind. And I was telling you I'm reading this book. I'm not too far into it, but one thing they were talking about was basically boy psychology versus male psychology or man psychology, and like the patriarchy being that it gets a negative connotation, which it is a negative, but basically a lot of these movements nowadays, especially the feminist movement, talking about how the male patriarchy is taking over this and that, and how it's a negative. And for the most part, what it symbolizes that they say is a negative, in terms of controlling everything and abusive behavior, language, this and that, and a lot more. But what they're arguing towards the beginning of this book is that the patriarchy that gets this bad rap, it's of course male oriented. When you talk about patriarchy, you're talking about men in charge, essentially. That's what it means. But what it argues is that it's not talking about men in charge. It's talking about boys in charge. It's just it just so happens that those boys are older. They don't ever mature properly. They one thing or another. They have the same, uh, let's say, what's the word? They have the same triggers. Let's say as a boy would have. Their impulses are similar. They don't ever mature past the stages of boyhood, and it goes into how why that is nowadays and this and that. But one thing that it mentioned was that a boy fears a real man, and I find a lot of truth in that. Especially you look at a lot of these guys nowadays that are grown men, and they have these fears that bring out these flaws in them, right? And I think everything to a certain extent is it stems from fear. So a lot of the ways they view other men, if they're in a relationship, right, and they have problems with their woman doing this or that, why? It's like, well, because they fear that something may happen. They fear that they may lose her, and that's like a small example, but fear is like at the core of it. And it's just like, well, what is it? Why would the fear be there if they're confident with themselves? And I guess that's the question, right? So another thing that is said that really struck me was that boys don't only fear real men, they fear women as well, and especially established women. And that's something that's very evident nowadays as well. Like when you get these guys that are very like their way or the highway, these guys that are super controlling, possessive, they're rarely with very competent women. They're with women that to a certain extent they deem below them, because those women will, let's say, deal with their shit, you know, because maybe those women are lacking something on their end as well. But for the most part, it's pretty cut and paste, like what these guys are like, and what it argues is that it stems from the idea that they are still boys. They never mature properly. And we could talk for hours on fears that you may have when you don't develop properly, and all these things, and all your inadequacies, and all your things that you lack confidence in, and your insecurities, this and that. But I really wanted to get into more so because it seems for me it's more important. It's like role does fear play in a real man? Because you could talk, like I said, about the boys, like what they fear. It's like, well, they fear things that they feel like they're lacking themselves because they don't have it. They don't have that confidence in themselves. So like they see anything that has it, a real man per se, as a threat. So they fear it. And but as a real man, let's say, someone who's confident in themselves, someone who has put their life in order to a certain extent, right? You're always figuring that out. But let's just say, what do they fear? Because fear still plays a role in your life. And I was thinking about it the other day. I was actually laying on the ground in the living room stretching. And I was like, what does fear play? I'm not sitting here saying I am, in the man psychology, like I'm not a boy anymore, like I'm so mature. But if I had to pick one, I would put myself in the category of a man rather than a boy. But it's just like, what do I fear? And the first thing that came to mind was God. And then it's just like, well, why? And I think one of the precursors to to maturing, right? I'm not going to just say man because I think it refers to men and women. I think one of the precursors to maturity is humility. And if you fear God, you're basically putting yourself below God. And a lot of these people nowadays who think that they have everything figured out, to a certain extent, they do believe that their word is all powerful. They think their way is the only way, that they don't put any stock in anything above them, because I don't know if they think that there isn't anything above them or what it is, but I think fearing God and that humility is one of the steps that to me is like one of the main fear factors in someone who's, I don't know if it's competent. I don't think that's the right word, but like mature, let's just say. Because that, when you have that fear in God, it's what keeps you in line. It's what keeps you in line, doing the right thing, living properly, and that's how you move upward. That's what I can speak for myself. I've been sitting here talking this whole time, but I have felt that I've grown substantially when my focus has been on making each decision as if what is the right decision in God's eyes. And the counter to that, the reason that's powerful to me, is because if I don't, I fear the consequences, because he's capable of doing stuff to my life that I can't even possibly imagine. So that fear is what keeps me in line. Similar to a child who fears the consequences of what his parents will do if he makes a bad choice. So it extends to like the prisoner's phase to a certain extent as well. But I'll give it to you. It's like, since you've been on this journey, what role have you noticed fear plays in your daily life, if at all? Anything that I'm saying, does it resonate with you? Do you feel that you experience it as well? I'm curious to kind of just see your opinion on what I just said and anything you can add, because I'd imagine you're growing obviously at a similar rate and similar pace. And what have you found?
I talk about fear a lot, especially in lessons, especially in my own life.
What do you mean lessons?
Like with kids, like I like pitching lessons. Sometimes I'll see them afraid to fully express themselves, especially in the first couple lessons. Or like I have a kid that is afraid to throw balls or afraid to hit people. So like I get to talk about fear a little bit there on a basic level. But like for me, like my fears, when I was younger, I think it was like the fear of validation, or the fear of wanting to be validated. So like I was always loud. I was different, and I still am different, but loud and boisterous and excessively look at me. And I think that was a fear of going unseen. So
would you say that was the boy in you coming out?
Yeah, for sure, because it's immaturity. Like,
yeah,
like look at me, like look what I can do, like that little like I'm a superhero type of guy. Like look at me, look what I can do is definitely a fear, and transitioning out of playing, transitioning into a different realm of my life, it's like I no longer care about people seeing me, what I'm doing. I care about what I say, because I do feel that when I'm around these kids and coaching, I do feel like I have an impact. I had a kid say, man, I listen to you more than I listen to my parents. And like, man, that opened my eyes. I was like, okay, like I have to be prepared. I have to know what I'm talking about when I open my mouth to speak. So like now my fear is making sure that I'm not spreading bullshit, is making sure that what I'm saying has intent, has purpose, and has humility behind it as well. Kind of like you're saying. So like I would say it's a fear of God, or fear of not living up to our. It's just an innate fear that I'm only out here. I no longer it's no longer about me. It's about everybody else that I'm coming into contact with. So like a humility for humankind or God's creation.
So what role does fear play in that, though? Like when you say that, what do you mean by the humility in picking your words and stuff like that? Is it a fear that you're going to be misunderstood in the perspective of them, or is it a fear of you saying the wrong thing in terms of saying something that isn't true to you, or something you haven't put into practice, or being fraudulent? Because like when I was not just making fun of myself, but when I'm talking about fear for me, it was more so the fear of the consequence of if I'm false, if I'm living in a way that's a false persona versus who I am behind closed doors, right? Like being fake. And I feel like a lot of narcissists or something like that, which essentially is one of the like personality traits of a person who's considered like a patriarch, right? It's like they're like almost in a way like psychopathic, in the sense that they are putting up a fake front to make themselves seem competent and this and that. Like, what are you like? So my initial question, like, is it fear in saying the wrong thing that they're gonna, let's say, take it a certain way and do something that you didn't mean, or is it exactly the second part that I said?
No, I feel that I don't ever really feel fraudulent. My biggest regret is like, hey man, I shouldn't have said that, or I could have said it better. And a lot of it is the first one, is hey, just shut up and kind of let them figure it out on their own, and just be like a guardrail. Because like being authentic is never something I've really struggled with. That's something I think I actually do pretty well. Is just no matter the setting, is I kind of bring up I am who I am.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So that isn't a fear of mine, because like I trust who I am. And so it's just like sometimes I say some things like being goofy or being sarcastic, or like maybe I'm genuinely trying to help the kid, but I don't realize the situation, and maybe more words is actually hurting him rather than less words. So the book I'm reading right now is called The Inner Game of Tennis, and it's about the mental side of sports. He's a tennis pro, so he's been given lessons for a number of years, and he goes, one lesson I just decided to give them a simple rule, and then I decided not to talk for the entire hour. And he goes, it was the best lesson I had like in a week. And so like I try to take that in, is like less is more, because the more I say, the more they think. And like in professional sports, I don't know if thinking clearly is a positive, but thinking too much is definitely a negative. And obviously there's a fine line and balance there.
That sounds like a conversation we've had this week.
Yeah, right. And so to me, it's like, say enough to get your point across, but don't say too much to cloud the clarity of what's going on. So like I sometimes I regret saying something, because it's like, man, like if you would have just shut up, it would have been a great day. You know, like for instance, yesterday, where I'm coaching a game, it's an inter squad type of deal, and there's the kid on the mound is a guy I've been giving lessons to, and ball goes up, definitely a pitcher's fly ball, but the guy behind the plate, I called out his name, so the pitcher backed off, and then the ball dropped, and so then the next pitch he gives up a single. So like I yelled out communicate, or I yelled out the kid's name, and then that backed him off instead of going to make a play. And I literally looked at the other coach and I was like, I should shut up. He goes, yep. And I was like, So that's
Yeah.
I would say that's my fear, is sometimes, like, again, that loud and boisterous is like something I've worked on really hard, is like just trying not to say too much. Like I just like I want to have fun, and I think I can bring that energy regardless of how loud or quiet I am.
So now, spinning off of from Zach the coach versus Zach the person, what role does that play in your life, if at all? I'm not trying to put like I don't want you to make up something if it doesn't actually affect your life on a daily basis. But is there anything that is fear oriented that pushes you each and every day to, you know, hold yourself accountable, or to live the right way, or to do the right thing, act a certain way, make the right decisions? You know, is there a fear aspect to it? Because like I said, for me, it's the fear of the repercussions of if I'm not the person that I believe God made me to be, if I'm not the person that I know I am to be, is on a daily basis. Do
Yeah,
you
so
find that there is anything that does that to you?
I understand your question. Yeah, and I think it comes down to accountability now. And so the more accountability that I take on the front of, like, the more bills I have to pay, the more jobs I take on, the more XYZ I take on, the more, like, I'm cooking, like, the more accountability that I take on, definitely the more fear that shows up. But
What do
also,
you mean by that?
so, like, as I progress through
What,
life,
I'm sorry. Let me rephrase. What role of what type of fear are we talking about?
the fear of having to go back on my word.
To yourself?
Well, yeah, and in turn that is God, but yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I believe that God is the creator of all things, and Johnny O and I have had this conversation a lot, and I think God resides inside of you. I think the devil resides inside of you as well. Um, but there's times where I've been meditating or doing yoga where I've had epiphanies of, like, what voice is talking. So, like, I know there's that conversation from within. And
Okay.
like, when I say myself, I don't, my meaning, my intention behind it is, like, that's my conversations with God. So, like, as that, if I'm sitting there meditating, like, that's a prayer, like, that's a conversation, that's a meditation on the word, or a conversation with God. So, like, yeah, I think that's those voices I hear, like, hey, like, what if you default on this apartment, or what if you don't make enough money to pay for XYZ or food, and, like, money's not the problem, like, but it is a fear of, like, if I don't do this, will I have enough? I think
Yeah.
that's my new fear, is, like, will I have enough to pay for the things that I want? And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
now it's just coming down to accountability and figuring it out.
That's something that I came up on as well when I was when I was laying there thinking about what role fear plays in my life, or what role fear plays in a true man's life. After the fear of God and fear of that part, I did say, well, I mean, everyone, a man or boy, it doesn't matter. If you're a grown man and you have a family, even though let's say you haven't matured properly, right? And you still have the tendencies of a boy, like, you're still gonna have a fear of not providing. It's just a matter of, what's the not providing going to signify to a boy versus a man. In my opinion, like, the man will look at it through the lens of, like, I'm not providing for my family, like, I am not doing a good job supporting them. It'll be more so like outside themselves, being inadequate in the eyes of them, and not being the man that they want their kids to look up to, or their wife, this and that, like, or be outside of them. Versus if the same situation for a boy, or a man who's not mature properly, will look at it through the lens of himself, how he feels about himself. I'm a failure, I'm this, I'm that. And it won't be through, like, as an example to others, if that makes any sense. Like, it'll be more so for what it signifies to themselves, that they're not making enough money, and I'm a failure, and I haven't done anything, and, blah blah blah. Versus, I feel like the other aspect, like I said, it's more, and outside themselves type of issue. But nonetheless, that's something that I thought about as well. But also, it's like, well, I can't say that's specific to only a man, because The fear of not providing, fear of not being able to afford your house, fear of not making money, fear of possibly losing your job if it's a reason outside of, your understanding or your ability, whatever it is. If it's just sometimes the business is going that way and they need to make cuts, for example, like that's always a fear. So I don't know if that's a fear that's technically oriented to just a true man. You know what I mean? I don't think that that's an example of that. So that's what I was thinking about the other day. But I want to like I said, I don't want you to have to make something up because if I keep asking you the same question, I guess if I'm keep asking, it means that it's not there. But is there anything in your life on a daily basis that forces you to make the decisions based off of the idea that if you don't, something will happen to you that you do not like, and it is going against the word that you've given yourself that this is the version that I am, this is what I do, this is who I am, this is what this version of me does. This is a promise that I have made with God that I'm going to uphold to the end. Like these types of fears where it's like you have put this down and you're going to live by them. And if you go against them, there's going to be repercussions, right? And those things grow with time as you mature because the sacrifices will grow as you grow. But like I said, for me, it's solely the fear of the negative consequence, right? It's like you can eliminate the negative from happening if you just don't do anything to earn it. So that's essentially how I look at it. It's like don't try and force yourself not to do something negatively, for example, in a situation. Just don't put yourself in a situation to make that choice in the first place. And that should eliminate the fear of making the wrong choice. If you eliminate the environment or the whatever it is that makes you think that way or makes you put yourself in that position. Like, so some people maybe they make the worst decision of their life when they drink. Okay, well, how about you don't try and just make better decisions when you drink? How about you just stop drinking and then you probably won't. You know what I mean? Like that's an example. That's one example. So, is there anything on a daily basis for you that you find that there's like the temptations, right? Or I don't want to say hedonism, that's more just pleasure oriented, but just in the sense of temptations that you suppress on a daily basis because that is not who you are. And if you give into that, there's going to be a downside. There's going to be a consequence, and you are terrified of what that consequence is. And that's enough to keep you in line.
I can't say that I think of life like that. The way if I were to break down my thought process is if I'm going to leave this house, if I'm going to leave my apartment, I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. So like I'm a sole believer in presence. And if that is my mindset going into it, if that's my attitude, then I can live with the consequences of whatever actions I partake in. Because like my attitude, my alignment is that I'm going to be my best self. So I may mess up. I may mess up, and I may unintentionally hurt somebody. Like whether that be saying too much, whether that be not being where they need me to be, XYZ, or I may hurt myself. But the intention is pure. The intention is if I'm showing up to do something, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. Like. There ain't no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like I think that's the my question for you was like, is there a moment where you felt like you transitioned from a man to a boy? And I think for me, that's exactly my question, or like my answer is the moment that I no longer gave class B or second rate offerings throughout my day, my life has changed dramatically. When I started showing up and giving my best, no matter what the situation, no matter how tired, no matter how energetic, no matter the situation, I always gave my best. My life has started to roll downhill. Mm-hmm. So I would say like that. That could be a fear or whatever, but like that was my transition from. And I'm obviously still working on it. I still have failures, but that is my mentality or attitude towards like the life that I live. Is like, if I'm going to do something, I'm not going to do it to a second-rate ability. Like it's the Cain and Abel story, to be honest.
Yeah.
And so like I was Cain, I was that resentful, I was that anger-filled. Why does he get this? XYZ. It's like, well, Like I looked at, and that required internal thought is like, did you give your best?
Yeah.
Could you
Are you offering your best?
Could
Yeah.
I have done more? Could I have, you know, those are the questions, or those are the answers that have changed my trajectory of my life, especially after rehab. Like, and I'm still learning, don't get me wrong, and still lacking at times whenever I'm extremely tired, or why am I doing this? And it's like, okay, well, why am I doing this? Is to provide. I'm doing this to provide.
Provide what?
A life full of humility, a life that I want to live, instead of doing something
That
that I
you
don't
want to live, or you're proud to live?
Same. Proud to live. Yeah. Want to live. Proud to live.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love being around the game. So what affords me to be around the game might not be what I'm passionate about, but I get to be around the game, and teach kids and be around what I want to do. Like I technically have, 2 or 3 jobs, but like when I go to baseball, I don't think of it as a job.
Yeah.
It's something, it's some place that I want to be. And like when I go, like I've noticed that like when I leave my first job from 7 to 2, like I'm like, oh, I'm so tired. And then all of a sudden I walk into practice, or I walk into a lesson, and my energy level is snapped right there. It's like, oh yeah, like, yeah, it fills me up, which allows me to pour it all back out. So like I guess turning it back to you is like, is there a moment in your life that you can recall where you had a change, where you were like, man, I'm a boy and I want to be a man, or looking back like, hey, this is where my life went from really immature to I stopped doing all that shit and I started to mature.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking about it this week actually, but I mean, it was pretty black and white. It came within seconds of asking myself the question. But it was my first spring training with the Cardinals, first year of pro ball after COVID, and I guess what initiated the transition was when I was going through all my problems in life, or when I was younger. Let's say all the problems I was dealing with. Everything I wanted, that I was struggling with, I wanted to deal internally, because I didn't want to show my inadequacy. I didn't want to show to anyone that I was struggling. Doing that would almost make myself feel like I was below the version of myself that I thought myself to be, right? But my first spring training, wasn't proud of the way things were going, not in terms of results, but the way I was thinking, my thought process with everything. And I went to the medical coordinator with the Cardinals, and I told him, I was like, here's what's going on. I was like, I'm not happy with how this is going, and I'm not sure how worse it can get. Like, I don't like this path, and I need help. And I would have never done that in college. Would have never done that before COVID. That was my first glimpse at like seeking help, seeking something outside myself, showing that I'm not capable of figuring this out on my own. I got off of social media in like August or September of 2020. So I'd already been off social media for nearly a year up to that point. So it really just wasn't that exact. It was more focusing on myself, this and that. But that spring training, when I made that decision, and then I don't want to say that decision was it, but where I made the transition from, I feel like where I initiated that transition to where the person I used to be died, essentially. That person that I used to be died. That's exactly what it is when I got introduced to my mental coach, the Cardinals, Brian Alzawi, and he introduced me to meditation, and through meditation I was introduced to prayer, and through prayer my relationship with God started to grow, and then I started realizing just what it looked like for me to be the version of myself that I was proud to be, what that took. And that was my morning routines, night routines, everything in between. And obviously that's evolved as the years have gone on. But I would say the transition was that distinct line, being introduced to my mental coach, but him showing me what order looks like. And once I was introduced to what real order looked like in life, because he asked me a simple question. It's like, what's your routine like off the field? And I didn't know what that meant, because obviously we all knew our routine on the field in terms of preparation. I was a starter, it was just like yourself. So I knew my routine from when I showed up to the field versus, to the national anthem, to how many pitches I needed after that, to when I was on the field. Like, I knew everything in between. But I didn't have any routine off the field, any consistency to be the version of myself that I was, because I didn't really know what that meant. I was just me. But then when he asked me that question, then I really started seeing, was like, all right, like I'm not who I want to be. Like, yeah, of course, playing wasn't going great with injuries and stuff like that, but even then, it's like I dealt with injuries after my this transformation, and the injury was way more manageable. Why? It's like because I was still me. I knew exactly who I was and the things I needed to be me. So the injury was just something I was going through on a professional level, but on a personal level, I wasn't injured. I was still me. And so when I was introduced to True Order and what that looked like, and it was as simple as getting up, making your bed every morning, having that be your first accomplishment. And then now as it evolved a little bit to like, cold exposure and stuff like that. And that being what I do, not taking warm showers ever. It's like, is that is it like a big flex where it's like you're so strong for doing that? No, but it's just that's the version of me. That's what I do. That's who I am. And, if there's ever a day where I don't want to do one, the only thing I have to tell myself is this is what this version of you does. And it's like, all right, yeah, you're right. So like being introduced to True Order, seeing what it did to my life, that was where that initiated the transformation. And I think it doesn't really get more true than that, because I would say when you're a boy, or I don't want to say boy, a girl or a boy, when you're immature and you're a child, your life is just full of chaos. There is no order. Like why would there be any order? You don't know any better. But I was thinking about this today, and it's pretty like it. If you read a lot of things, you hear a lot of things. For the most part, everything I've seen and heard is that, speaking of men here, typically they start dealing with things psychologically, like depression, anxiety, stuff like that, stuff of that sort. They start dealing with it like in the ages like 18 to 25, 18 to 24. Like that's when it really starts for guys. It's like, well, I was thinking about that just today. It's like, why? Why 18? Why? Well, probably because they don't know anything. You don't know anything up like until you're somewhat at the right age to where 18 is you graduate high school, you're out on your own. Like for the average person, you go to college and you're living on your own, and you're introduced to all these different stimuli, let's say, and you're introduced to the hedonism and the pleasure of like wanting woman and like being able to have them whenever you want, let's say, because you live on your own and all this and that, and like you start to really see like all the temptations of the world.
Well,
it's like 18 to 24 is when it starts.
I think it comes down to that simply is you're on your own.
Yeah, exactly.
You no longer have a wall to lean on.
Exactly. And you can do what you want with it, but essentially, if you're doing it properly, but it's rare to it's naive to think this is going to be the case. That immediately once you get on your own, you're going to start the prisoner's phase and prove yourself you're worthy of this freedom, because you have to live through what it looks like to be on your own and to make the failures and realize why those failures were started or were created, I guess. But anyways, men go through this like around 18 to 24, 25, and it's like, well, probably because everything up to that point is just pure chaos. And like around that age is like you start to see things, and then you start to struggle, and you start to feel things you never felt before, and you have more responsibility, and just things start to kind of click. And then what happens is like, well, if you're in full chaos and you're dealing with this and you have no idea how to get out of it, yeah, you're going to feel pretty demoralized. You're going to feel pretty upset. You're going to feel pretty overwhelmed. And it's not the case for everybody, but the average is what it says, 18 to 24, 25. But I would say when I took on order in my life is where I started noticing the change. That's when I started noticing the transformation. And at the beginning, the fear is different. It's still, at the beginning, what pushed me was the fear of being the version of myself that I used to be. That was the fear. Being the version of myself that I used to be, being somebody in my life, like a person that I'm in my life that I don't want to be like. And as if I did anything that resembled the characteristics of that person, I knew it was on the wrong path. That was a fear, right? And And then those fears kind of evolved, and so it became more so not even so much of a fear of being the version of myself that I used to be, but then it's a fear of not living up to the person that I've created, and not living up to the person that God has pushed me to become. And then, not living up to the sacrifices that I feel are adequate to where I am and what I'm doing and the promises that I made to myself and God and what this version of myself I believe does, and all these things. Like there's these sacrifices, let's say, that you kind of make um, you put into word, let's say, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, this is how I live, these are the rules. I don't know if that's the right word, but the promises that I live by. And if you're doing it right, in my opinion, those things truly keep you accountable. They hold you accountable because those are your pillars. Like that's your morals. That's your character. And so, yeah, in a long-winded way, I feel like my transition initially, when I look at it, is when I took on order in my life, when order was initiated, and that was that first spring training when I was introduced to that mental coach.
Accountability, right? Like when you
accountability, to a certain extent. I was always accountable. Like that's the thing. Like I don't know if it's like, yes, you're right, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but accountability it's a strange word because I was always accountable. Like so much so, like in my professional life, in my training, I held myself accountable to the person I am in terms of discipline. That was the same I was like that when I was 12. In terms of training, that's why I was the version of myself that I was when I was playing, when I was healthy. That's where my confidence came from, that discipline. But it didn't and it doesn't translate to being a good person. It does not.
Yeah.
That discipline that you have in your professional life for training and for this and that, it does not translate to being a good person. You only become a better person if you have the humility to do so. You have that voice that's bigger than you. And when you're really good at sports and you're really good at something, that voice that's bigger than you, let's say, like if you're doing it wrong, you don't even know it's there because you think you're so good. You think you are that voice.
Yeah, you ignore it for sure.
And the precursor, I think, to true development is like when you give in to the fact that there is something bigger than you that's guiding your life. And then it's like, well, these successes that I'm having, all these things that I'm being able to provide for my family, all these accolades I'm getting, and all this success and whatever I'm getting, they're not my doing. It's because something bigger than me is rewarding me. Why? Because I'm living properly. It's like reverse psychology. It's the person that you are is earning the good successes that you're experiencing. It's not successes that is creating the person. And I think when you're immature, you look at it like your successes is what creates the person that you are. And that's why a failure affects your personality so much. It affects the way you think of yourself so much. But when you look at it the other way, that the person that I am is allowing me to earn the good in my life, then I don't think there's any negative you can ever get. Because if you get a negative, you resort back to what did I do that may have possibly have earned me the negative. And then that's your learning phase. And if you can't figure out what you did wrong, maybe you need to pray on it longer, or maybe you didn't do anything wrong and things just happened the way they did. So that switch in thinking was a big step, and that didn't happen immediately. That happened probably like a year or two, probably a little longer after the fact. But then there's steps to everything. That's why, like the thing we were talking about a few weeks back, about like the lessons you teach as a coach. They have to evolve as you evolve as a person, right? It's like you have to keep evolving, but not because you need to have the players you're coaching this and that like start to on these new lessons that you've found, right? It's more so like you need to evolve as a person to be able to guide them from your starting point up. you know?
Their starting point up. Their starting point up.
Well, yeah, their starting point, but more so like I feel like everyone's starting point to a certain extent is based around the same idea, putting life into order. And when you sell out for that, then there's really no limit. There's really no limit to how much order you can put your life in. It's just a matter of if you can implement the chaos again, and that's the problem. I feel like that I found, but it's the goal is like being able to help other people along as well. But like you can't expect them to start where you are. Right. It has to start back because the lessons that you learn, yeah, they're initiated by something outside of you that is facilitated something in your life to get to that point. But your lessons, your failures, that once you start the process and really live by it, your own lessons is going to have you continue growing. But as a coach, you can just kind of guide them along. Would you say that for you, rehab was your turning point?
It's what created the accountability, the self accountability, and it. I mean, kind of like your progress. Like I had 3 or 4 dark months, like where again I was living the same life I was living. But then like it was just there was a point in time where I was just sitting. I'll never forget it. I was sitting on my porch and it was raining, pouring in Florida.
Weird.
Right, and I just started crying, and like I was crying as hard as it was raining, to be honest. And I was like, "Where's my life?" Yeah, just about life in general. I was like, "Where's it going? What am I doing?" Like, I was just looking into the deep dark abyss, and then it was like, well, like the only place to start is to look up, one, and shine the light on what's good. Like, what do you do well? What do you want to do well? Who are you? And those were like the questions that I sat on for months and answered on months and wrote on months and probably years about is like, who do you want to be? Who are you? What does this life, what is this life type of deal? Or what do you want to create out of this life? If God made me to be a creator, what am I going to create? And it's like, well, again, and so now I'm here. Like now I'm, I have found my passion again, being around the game and teaching and coaching, but I'm also having to do something that I'm not passionate about as well. So it's like it's again a balance. But yeah, I would say rehab really put me into a position of like, are you accountable? Do you give your best effort? Who are you? And like, because I don't want to say I was floating by on talent alone, because I did work hard. I lifted the weights, like I did the stuff, but again, like I partied and I had fun. And if I didn't have as much fun and I took it I had a little more accountability on diet, a little more accountability on sleep, a little more accountability on self-growth, like maybe I would have asked myself those questions 6 months earlier and maybe been in a different position than I am right now. But again, that's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. I'll never know. So yeah, I would say that moment that being a big leaguer was taken out of the equation changed my life. Because I think I knew that whenever I blew out that I was over, but I didn't believe it until they released me. Or until I quit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so like when that was ripped out, that when the validation of other people was ripped out from underneath me, I had to find validation in something other than that, which led me down a deep, dark path for quite some time. Because one, you turn to yourself, and obviously that's no bueno. And then like you have to give it up. You have to give up that ego, or you have to die. You have to let that version of yourself die, and then something else will regrow.
Mm-hmm. Now this is you're speaking of after your release in this.
Well, yeah, it was just that year and a half, 2 year process. Like really, yeah. I mean, it really hit home, man. Like for real, like it was a whole. Imagine
you had to live through that and to figure things out all at once. Imagine you hadn't started the ball rolling 2 years prior, 3 years prior, and you had to deal with all that.
Well, I did
without knowing you.
I would say I did do that. Like the minute I blew out, I wasn't doing any work. I wasn't
Oh
doing
no,
any work.
I'm talking about after you released. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, like right. No, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for what happened. But I also look back with some like, man, I wish I would have. Regret, I guess. You know, like, man, if only.
Yeah, it's regrets.
We can dive into that
conversation. We can,
we can dive into that. We're right at our.
Yeah, regrets a tough one because whenever I ask myself that, I truly don't really find many things I regret. There's a few I can think of, but they're very minimal.
I just got one.
Every negative for me, truly that like you may want to regret. It's like there's so many positives that have come from that one negative, right? And it's just like, really, like do you really wish that didn't happen? And hindsight 2020, of course, but like, man, I don't know. That definitely be an interesting conversation. But yeah, there we go. Fear and what
leads us into regret.
Yeah. I'm not sure if fear itself leads into regret.
No, but I'm just saying it leads into our yeah, right.
No, but I was excited to talk about it, see kind of where it got us, because like I said, fear for a boy's mind is pretty obvious, but what does fear play in, let's say a mature person, whether it be woman or man? That's kind of what I was like getting into. It's like, well, what role does fear play in a true man then? If that's what they're arguing for the boy psychology, well, then what is fear for someone who's mature properly? And it sounds like for us both, fear plays two different roles in our life. And I think, not to go too far, this will only take a few minutes, not even, but I think it's a great example of, living. I don't live this way because of, let's say, the Old Testament. You don't live your way because of the New Testament, but it's just almost like they just resemble, right? And you live in a very, we've talked about in the past, where you're more forgiving than me. And that's a good thing. That's definitely a good thing. But if we talk about our characters, it makes perfect sense, because I live in a very regimented, discipline-oriented lifestyle. And it makes perfect sense to why I view fear the way I do. Because if I don't live through that discipline, the fear of the consequences is what keeps me in that discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, it's a little different in the sense that you forgive yourself a little easier. Not like it's a bad thing, but you just view the steps to obtaining what you want to obtain. You go through it in a different way, versus I do A, B, C, D. You may go from A to C, back to B, then to D. And there's nothing wrong with that if you just end up, as long as you end up at D. That's the thing.
Right.
If you go from A to C to B and then you're stuck at B, there's the problem. But right. Like when I make the thing about the New Testament, Old Testament, is like the New Testament, God is more forgiving. Jesus comes and saves everyone from their sins and this and that. Versus the Old Testament, God is a lot more harsh and cruel, and you have to earn your let's say blessings, and you have to prove to him you're following his path, and you're following the journey that he has planned for you, and like earning all these things. He's a lot more cruel. He'll literally kill you in the Old Testament. He will kill you if you do not follow his orders and his rules. So interesting seeing that play out. Obviously you and I are very close to seeing how just different we are, but same path essentially.
Yeah. We're walking side by side, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But anyways, you enjoy your Sunday, my friend. And I will talk to you throughout the week, if not next weekend.
Absolutely.
Peace.
Adios, amigo.